All right, I would like to thank you all for joining us for Exercise is Medicine. It's part of our the UMKC Illinois Association's Wellness Series. Sorry. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our speaker, Dr. Margaret E. Gibson. Dr. Gibson received her medical degree from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine in 2005, and in 2008 graduated, from residency in family medicine. She completed the primary care sports medicine fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in 2009. Dr. Gibson is a dual board certified in medicine, family medicine and sports medicine. Dr. Gibson joined the medical staff at Truman Medical Center, Lakewood in 2009 and has a faculty appointment with the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Medicine as an associate professor. She is the program director of the UMKC Sports Medicine Fellowship and works with athletes ranging from high school to college. She has experience treating musculoskeletal conditions and medical conditions in elite athletes and weekend warriors. In addition, she received extensive concussion management training while in Pittsburgh. She serves as the medical director for the Kansas City Marathon and the Hospital Hill Run. She is also active in national sports medicine organizations. In addition to treating patients in Kansas City, she also travels internationally as a USA volleyball physician and a member of the US Ski and Snowboard Physician Pool. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Gibson.
All right, well, thank you guys for having me. So the topic today is exercise is medicine, and we're going to talk about implementing and overcoming barriers to exercise. If you guys have questions, I think we're going to have you type them into the chat, and then hopefully at the end, we'll have some time to go through those questions. So my disclosure is that I did not create this idea of exercise as medicine. So most of the information that I'm going to be providing you today was actually developed by the American College of Sports Medicine. And as a member of the American College of Sports Medicine, I have received a lot of education about their exercise as medicine program, and then have been able to implement one here in Kansas City in my own practice. So exercise is medicine and the American College of Sports Medicine have created kind of some fun flyers that we have for patients. This is just one example. So add years to your life, one step at a time. If you want to move better, feel better, get healthier, regular physical activity is really something that can help with that. So, kind of taking the first step today is what we're going to talk about. So one question that comes up is, well, why do we need to promote physical activity? And unfortunately, the cost of inadequate physical activity is very high on our healthcare system. It costs $117 billion annually. And there's also a 10% rate of premature mortality in people who are not being physically active enough. So this is showing you kind of the percent of US adults 18 or older who are meeting the aerobic and muscle strength guidelines. And this was from 2008 to 2016, where the study ran. And unfortunately, as you can see, the numbers are very low, with, as far as women, only about 15% are meeting those guidelines. And for men, a little bit higher, but only about 22, but definitely less than 25% of people are meeting those guidelines. In addition, when we look at issues with childhood obesity, we have seen rates triple since the 1970s. Obesity is actually disqualifying almost a third of young Americans from joining military services because of that. When you look over here on the right, there's a table that shows you the percent of US high school students who actually meet the aerobic physical activity and muscle strength guidelines. And, unfortunately, not much better kind of than the general population, with the females at about 15%, and then the male population at about 30%. So one of the barriers is kind of, what are the physical activity recommendations? If we're not sure about what the recommendations are, it's going to be pretty hard to meet those. So in 2018, the physical activity guidelines were updated. And so here's kind of a chart of the physical activity guidelines. So when we look over here, individuals 6 to 17 years old should be getting 60 minutes of moderate or vigorous physical activity during at least 3 days of the week. And they should also be doing 3 days a week of strength training. And that can be included as part of that 60 minutes of physical activity. And they do recommend that that is some bone loading activity that's included. When we look at kind of the next age group, that's the 18 to 64-year-old group. And that's where most of the population is going to fit. And so when we talk about physical activity a lot, we're going to talk about this 150 to 300 minutes of moderate physical activity a week, or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity a week. And that can be spread throughout the week, and we'll talk about combinations and those types of things. As far as muscle strengthening, they do recommend that adults work all of their major muscle groups 2 or more days a week. When we get to the older group, those over 65, they really have the same requirements of that 150 to 300 minutes, or if they're unable to meet that, to be as active as possible. And then as far as muscle strengthening, they do recommend the muscle strengthening, but they also include balance training and combination activities as ways to help prevent falls and things like that. One of the main points when they kind of came up with these new guidelines is they wanted to focus on all ages with this sit less, move more, and all physical activity counts. It used to be that when we talked about physical activity, we said, oh, you need to get 20 minutes at a time. And we've really gone away from that. And, you know, a minute of physical activity is a minute of physical activity, and all those minutes are going to add up to benefit you. So when we talk about these types of physical activity, you need to understand, you know, what is aerobic activity? So aerobic activity is when the body's large muscles are moving in a rhythmic manner for a sustained period of time. So examples of this are going out on a walk, maybe a jog, swimming, and bicycling. When we talk about aerobic activity, there's really 3 components that we're talking about. So one is intensity, and that's how hard the person is working doing the activity. The next is frequency, or how often you're doing that activity. And then the final is duration, and how long does that activity or that session of that activity last. The second type of activity that we talked a little bit about in those initial slides was muscle building activity. And so that is going to be physical activity, including exercise that increases muscle strength, power, endurance, and mass. So examples of this are things that you think about a lot, like lifting weights, or maybe using resistance bands. You can also do body weight exercises, carrying heavy loads. That's one that you may do a lot if you're doing grocery shopping and not realize it, and then heavy gardening. So, and that's kind of one of the points of this talk today, is to think a little bit outside the box and what we kind of traditionally think of as, muscle strength activity doesn't necessarily mean you have to go hit the gym and grab some dumbbells. When we're talking about the muscle strengthening activity, that also has 3 components. So we talk about intensity. So that would be how much weight or force is used when the person is lifting. Frequency, again, is how often they're doing that activity. And then we talk about sets and repetitions. So how many times that person does that muscle strengthening activity, either in a set or in multiple sets and repetitions. So another barrier that has come up with physical activity is determining the intensity, because as you might remember from that slide, it said you have to get 150 to 300 minutes of moderate activity or 75 minutes of vigorous activity. So there are very detailed and complex ways to figure out intensity. So this chart kind of goes through METs, what we call your percent VO2 max, your percent heart rate reserve, your percent heart rate max, and then this RPE scale, and then give some examples. So just rather than worrying kind of about it in this much detail, I've tried to find ways to make this a little bit easier for everyone to kind of understand, well, what is moderate activity and what is vigorous activity. So it's not moving forward. So my next slide, rather than focusing on all those numbers and being stressed out and trying to figure out what your percent VO2 max is, these are just some examples of looking at moderate activity. So moderate intensity activity on the left would be something that's about 3 to 6 METs. And that again is just kind of a measurement of how hard you're working. Examples of this moderate intensity exercise are going to be, a very quick walk, dancing, gardening, doing some household chores, traditional hunting and gathering, which we probably don't do as much anymore. Active involvement in sports. So this could be, running around with your kids, or, taking them to the park and jogging behind them as they are out on their bikes. General activities, if you have a job maybe that's very physically demanding, such as roofing or painting, you'll be achieving that kind of moderate intensity physical activity throughout the day. And then moderate intensity can be moving or carrying heavy loads. When we talk about vigorous physical activity, That is over here on the right, and that's going to be greater than 6 METs. So that's a larger amount of effort that should cause kind of rapid breathing and a substantial increase in heart rate. So things like that would be running, walking very quickly up a very large hill. If you go out for a very fast bike ride, so not just, you know, a kind of leisurely one, but really working to get some speed there or do some hills. Very fast swimming, participating in more competitive sports, heavy shoveling or digging, you know, sometimes during the winter we see that, and then carrying heavier loads. So when I'm talking to patients in my practice about, you know, okay, well, are you doing moderate activity? Are you doing vigorous activity? There, you know, are kind of this easy test that they've come up with called the talk test. And so as a rule of thumb, if someone is doing a moderate intensity aerobic activity, they should be able to talk, but not sing during the activity. So the idea is if you're able to kind of sing as you're doing it, you're probably not reaching that moderate level of intensity yet. And then if a person is doing vigorous intensity activity, that's when they're not going to be able to say more than a few words without pausing for a breath. So that means that they're going to be working very hard and only be able to get, you know, short bursts of words out at a time and not be able to necessarily have a full conversation, you know, with someone that they're with. So as I had mentioned earlier, really any activity counts. And so this is just saying that there is no lower threshold for the benefits of physical activity. So any physical activity you do is going to benefit you. We do see kind of the most benefits at that 150 to 300 minutes of moderate physical activity a week. And that is, you know, why that recommendation exists. When you look at this chart over here at the right, so on x-axis down here, so this is the leisure time physical activity per week, and we broke it down to METs and hours per week. And then this is the hazard ratio of mortality, meaning that you want lower numbers because you don't want to be dealing with mortality. So if you see here, initially, if you're not exercising and you start exercising, so even right away, you're going to see immediate benefits, and there's going to be a very steep slope as far as kind of decreasing that hazard ratio for mortality. Again, this is around the 150 to 300 minutes. And so that recommendation is there because you can kind of see if you're looking to see where the slope on the graph is going to have gotten the most people, it is kind of around there. But you can also see is if you increase that amount of activity, there's really no negative benefits. So there's no evidence of increased risk if you get to the higher end of that physical activity. So those are all good things to remember. One question that comes up is we focus a lot on moderate activity and vigorous activity. Well, what if you can't do moderate activity or vigorous activity? So there was a good study that looked at low intensity activity. And so right here, you can kind of see that this was the initial VO2 max. So these patients over here on the left had a lower VO2 max, this is kind of the middle group, and then this was kind of the higher group. And the more fit you are, the higher your VO2 max is going to be. So then they looked kind of at the increase in VO2 max over time in the study. So again, how much did they improve? And then they looked at the intensity or how hard were they exercising. So the good news is when they looked at these people who started with the lowest VO2 max, so the people who were the least fit, it didn't matter if they did the low intensity, which is kind of here, the moderate intensity, or even the high intensity, because they saw benefits in all three of those groups. So the people who were initially the least fit, any type of intensity of exercise improved their VO2 max significantly. As you can see, when you go over here, those who started in that moderate group, if they did low intensity, they did not see as much of a benefit, but they still did see some. And the same, you know, they saw more of an improvement when they did kind of moderate intensity and vigorous intensity. When you looked at the people who were the very most fit, if they did low intensity, they did not see an improvement. But again, they did see improvements when they did moderate and high intensity. So kind of the good news from this study was that people of low to moderate fitness levels, so these kind of two groups here, will benefit from low intensity physical activity. So if you or you're talking to a patient or someone you work with and they're concerned, you know, oh, I can't do this vigorous activity, I can't do this moderate activity. If they're not physically active at all, even starting with very low intensity activity will be beneficial for them. So that's an important point to remember. Another question, that I get as a physician is, well, I'm seeing these patients, how do I know if they're meeting the physical activity recommendations? And maybe that's something you're asking yourself. Well, how do I know if I'm meeting the physical activity recommendations? So in the office, we use what's called the physical activity vital sign, again, created by the American College of Sports Medicine. And it's just a few easy questions. The first is, on average, how many days per week do you engage in moderate or strenuous activity? So for example, how many days a week do you take a brisk walk? And then on average, how many minutes do you engage in activity? So if you walk 2 days a week for 60 minutes, that's 120 minutes of physical activity per week. So while that's great that you're doing that, that's not quite meeting the aerobic physical activity guidelines that have been set out. The second question looks at muscle strengthening. And again, this question is just, how many days a week do you perform muscle strengthening exercises? And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be weight that you're using, could just be body weights. So those are kind of what we can use in the physician's office. We're able to incorporate those into our electronic medical record. It's something that we can complete at every visit when the patient comes in. It's a great way to kind of flag a patient if they're not meeting the current recommendations, and then maybe start talking to them about readiness for change to increase their physical activity. And if you have a patient who's really trying to engage in regular physical activity, it can be a good way to track their physical activity and how they're doing when you're looking at those physical activity vital signs. So one of the challenges is when we talk about physical activity and encouraging patients to be physically active is, is this going to work for everyone? And no, it's not. We have to find patients who are kind of in the right state of change. And so contemplation and preparation are really what we're looking for. If you have talking to someone and you try to mention physical activity to them and they're kind of in this pre-contemplative stage, they're not ready to start being physically active. There are some things that we can do for those patients. And so those are the patients that talking about the health benefits of regular exercise can be very helpful. And then, trying to personalize the discussion directly to them. So here are just a list of some of the benefits. So if you have someone, or maybe you're that person who's like, I just don't know if I want to start being more physically active, here is a great list of all the benefits of physical activity for adults and older adults. I'm not going to go through all of them, just kind of for the sake of time, but there's definitely some highlights here. Lowers your risk of all-cause mortality, so less risk of dying, lowers cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, lowers like bad things in your cholesterol and lipid profile, improves cognition, decreases a lot of risk of cancers. And then here's, improved quality of life, helps with anxiety, depression, can help improve your sleep, obviously help with weight gain, and then improve bone health and physical function, and especially in older adults, as I mentioned, kind of lowering risk of falls. For kids, there's still a lot of benefits. It improves bone health, improves weight status, improves cardiorespiratory and muscular fitness, improves their cardiometabolic health, and then also improves cognition and reduces the risk of depression. Unfortunately, we are seeing higher rates of depression in our younger patients, so this could definitely be something to recommend to that age group. So as I mentioned, those stages of change. So let's say you or your patient is kind of in that contemplative or pre-contemplative stage. So these are patients who you want to write an exercise prescription for. And so the question then becomes, okay, well, if they're thinking about starting to exercise regularly, or if they're preparing to exercise regularly, what can we do to help them? And this is where that exercise prescription comes in. So if you haven't heard of an exercise prescription, we'll talk a little bit about that. And one of the first questions people ask is, well, what do you need in an exercise prescription? So they have created kind of this little acronym. It's called FIT-VP. And as you'll see, a lot of these things are things that we talked about earlier when we talked about aerobic activity and muscular activity. So FIT stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type. And then the VP stands for volume and progression. So frequency, again, is how often that exercise is going to be done each week. Intensity is how hard the exercise will be done. Time is how long they will be doing the exercise, and type is the mode of exercise. And then the volume is just the total amount of exercise overall, and the progression is how are you planning on advancing that program? And that's important to keep people engaged and active and improving their strength and cardiorespiratory fitness. So again, I can't take credit for this form, but the American College of Sports Medicine came up with this great exercise as medicine prescription. So this is actually something that we, when we meet with a patient to talk about exercise as medicine, when they leave that visit, they will leave with this form, and it will be filled out, for them. A lot of the visits that I have with my patients are kind of talking about what activities do they like to do, if there's activities that they feel that they're unable to do because of medical limitations or things like that. So as you can see, we come up with a frequency. How many days a week are they going to be doing it? Intensity, how hard are they going to be working? And again, even that light and low level intensity can be beneficial for those people who are previously not physically active. Time, we're going to figure out how long we're going to be doing this exercise. And when we start a lot of these exercise prescriptions, we start with 10 minutes. If you have a goal of, doing 60 minutes of physical activity a day, that's great. But if you're not doing any, it's going to be really hard to reach that 60. So starting over here with the lower numbers and then slowly increasing is where you're going to be able to see kind of that growth and that improvement and find it easier to sustain. We also talk about the type of activity. And one easy thing that a lot of patients will do is if they have a watch or a step counter, is they'll start getting an idea of how many steps they're taking. And I've had patients, that their initial goal is, okay, we're going to get you up to 2,500 steps a day. That's going to be our initial goal. And then we talk about how many days a week are we going to do that. So there's a lot of individual aspects that you can kind of work through when you're creating an exercise prescription. And the more individualized you make it, the easier it is going to be for that patient to kind of meet those things, because you'll have been focusing on exactly, what works for them or what doesn't work for them. Down here on the bottom, you can see it also talks about muscle training. And, ideally we want to, try to get a few days a week, but oftentimes I'll just start with one, because if you're not doing it at all, starting with 1 day a week is great. The thing I kind of like about this exercise prescription is it gives you just some easy points about strength training. You don't have to go to a gym. A lot of patients have been able to get elastic bands at home. If they don't have bands, we talk about body weight exercises. We'll start with empty milk jugs, filled up with water, or cans that they have in their cupboard. There's just a lot of different things that you can kind of use to work on strength training. Okay. The other good news is that patients who received a written prescription for exercise, in one study actually increased their physical activity 1 hour per week more than those who didn't. So, it's one thing to tell someone to be physically active, but if you give them, a form with some examples and, ways that they could really work for them, you're going to probably increase their chances of being successful with that. So one of the biggest issues that we face is, patients will come and they'll say, well, I can't exercise because X, Y, or Z. So a lot of what I do is spending time and kind of talking to patients to figure out, what barriers do they have to exercise. And a very common one is I can't exercise with my joint pain. A lot of times this will be knee pain. Sometimes we'll also see it in patients with hip pain. So if that's something that's a challenge for you, I usually talk to people about recommending low impact activities. So things like walking, swimming, and water exercise are great. If you are able to get in a pool, that's going to kind of take gravity out of the situation, so you won't be loading those joints that are painful. So people find that they're much more successful with meeting the aerobic activity requirements when they're either swimming or doing water exercises in a pool. Cycling is also good, as there's not as much pounding on the joints. And then we talk about even seated activity, including weights. And then I've had patients who, just kind of started with one of those arm bikes because they weren't really able to start with anything else. As I had mentioned, when I write that exercise prescription, I always start with short sessions, 5 to 10 minutes. That's fine. You don't expect someone to be able to go from 0 to 60 immediately. So let's start and kind of build up gradually. Another good point, if you have joint pain, is making sure you're doing kind of a long warm up and then a gradual cool down. as your intensity of your physical activity gets longer and more intense. And then also increasing slowly and taking breaks when you're doing your activity can be very beneficial. As I mentioned, again, the American College of Sports Medicine and Exercises Medicine have actually created an entire brochure and pamphlet about exercising with osteoarthritis, and they just have a lot of good examples there, very specific for patients who might have issues, with chronic knee pain or chronic hip pain, and again, some additional ways that you can work to kind of overcome those. This is a popular one right now. I can't exercise in the winter. Now, I will say, again, I might be biased. I grew up in Michigan, but I kind of feel like we usually have pretty mild winters here in Kansas City. There's definitely usually a few days of cold weather, but even, the last few days, you can have seen a lot of people out being physically active. So if there's no ice, go outside dressed appropriately. During the winter, this might mean extra layers. If you are a runner, we kind of talk to people about the 20-degree rule, meaning that, as you start to run, it's going to feel about 20 degrees warmer to you. So you don't want to overdress, or it will be very difficult for you to complete your activity. So layers are very helpful. If it's windy, having kind of, an outer layer that's windproof will definitely help. This was a good example that someone told me, is either sleeping in your exercise clothes or putting them on the heater right next to you. So, if your heater kicks on a little bit before you get out of bed, have those exercise clothes there so they're nice and toasty. It's going to be easier to put those on and then, go to the gym or go to the basement or, go outside. Daylight savings has kind of been an issue for some patients. They say, well, by the time I get home from work, it's too dark. I can't go on my walk. Maybe walking during a lunch break is an option. A lot of us are, spending a lot of time at home now too. So, finding a way to kind of get out of the house before it gets dark in the evenings is definitely beneficial. Another good one is putting it on the calendar. If you have a time you're going to exercise every day, put that into your phone, put that on your calendar. That helps make you a lot more accountable for that. A good one is to make your goal just to go to the gym, because if you go to the gym, you're going to probably do something when you're there. Most people, say, oh, I'm here, I might as well exercise for half an hour now that it took me 10 minutes to drive here. It's going to take me 10 minutes to drive back. So if your goal is to just go to the gym and exercise for 5 minutes, chances are you're going to find that time ends up being longer than what you initially had planned on. Walking malls is still an option. There are less malls, unfortunately, but that is definitely something you can do. Obviously, right now we recommend wearing a mask and staying away from others, but that's a good option. And then looking into the silver sneakers option for patients who have Medicare can be very beneficial. And there's 13,000 locations in the United States, and there's many here in Kansas City. And then throughout the country, I'm sure, where some of the alumni might be located, is a great way to, have your older population find ways to be physically active. I'm also a big fan of YouTube and app-based indoor activities, and we'll talk about some of those a little bit later. This one is obviously unique. I can't exercise during the pandemic. Well, there are ways to exercise during the pandemic, and they actually kind of created this one. Some of the countries were on very strict lockdown and not even able to leave their houses, but some good examples of aerobic activities: put on some music, walk around the house, go up and down the stairs, do that, a few times a day. Having a dance party with your kids is always a good one. If you can tolerate it, jumping rope is a really easy activity. It does not require a lot of equipment or a lot of space. Doing an exercise video, if you have that, is good. If you're able to go outside, as I mentioned, walking, jogging, just staying 6 feet apart from people, being active in a local park, trying to spend time in nature, just wash your hands, when you get back in the house, maybe going for a bike ride, do some gardening. And the good news is the spring actually is coming, right? It's going to be around the corner, and just trying to play active games with your family is always good. One thing I talk to people about is, if you are going to go outside and if there's, maybe a really fun jogging path, maybe that's really crowded, but if you just kind of stay over, maybe just on some neighborhood roads, maybe it won't be quite as scenic, but there might be less people on there, so easier to social distance. Strength training, there's a lot of strength training workout apps. The 7-minute workout is a great one. You don't need any equipment. You just do it all with body weights. And then that can obviously be modified as you get better and stronger at it. Strength training videos, there's tons of those online. And then performing yoga can definitely help, not only with your physical activity and physical fitness, but with mindfulness and ways to reduce anxiety, which is definitely important during this time. As I said, just some easy examples they talk about are squats or sit to stands, doing a push-up against a wall. If you can't do a push-up against the floor, that's fine. Start with doing it on the wall. As you get better from the wall, then move to a kitchen counter, and then eventually move down to the floor. And then lunges, step ups on stairs, things like that are all things that you can do to work on strength training with no equipment necessary. So as I had mentioned, again, the bottom line is move more, sit less. Sitting itself increases the risk of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease mortality, type 2 diabetes, colon, endometrium, lung cancers. So here in this chart, they just showed as you increase your moderate to vigorous physical activity, you get to the green, decreasing your mortality rate. So that's always good. Unfortunately, if you're sitting all day at work, then we need to find some ways to help you get down here in this green area. So we'll talk a little bit about those. If you're at home, if you're watching TV, a good way to do it is tell yourself, I'm going to get up during every commercial. Unfortunately, now with Netflix and some of the other things, people are like, well, I just binge watch shows. Okay, well, at least between the shows, or maybe if it's an hour-long show, you're going to need to take a little bit of a break in the middle anyways. So get up, walk around during that break. If you're working from home, maybe set an alarm for every 30 to 60 minutes, get up, walk around. I know a lot of people's watches say, hey, you've been sitting for 50 minutes. It's time to get up and walk around. Don't just ignore that, get up and do it. Things that you can do is kind of walk a lap around the house, maybe do some jumping jacks, maybe do some sit-ups, maybe do some push-ups, just easy things that you can even, do in a small office space. If you are home, there's active chores that you can engage in, such as vacuuming, sweeping, maybe taking out the garbage, especially if you're in an apartment, you have some stairs to go up and down, that's always a good one. And then same thing with laundry. So again, American College of Sports Medicine to the rescue here. So on their website, they've created a bunch of great options for this, sit less, move more. An easy thing to do is, maybe say, okay, find this printed up. Okay, what am I going to do this week? And again, you're not going to do every single one of these. The first week you decide I'm increasing my physical activity, you're going to maybe try to pick one of them. So, here's a good one is we're spending more time maybe on the phone talking to people. So rather than sitting down, get up and walk around when you're talking to them. If you're going somewhere, use the stairs. You can park further away in the parking lot and then walk in. Those are all kind of easy ways to increase your physical activity. And again, every little bit counts. So even if you park at the back of the grocery store parking lot, that extra, minute of walking in is an extra minute of physical activity for you for the day. Some other easy ones is maybe you get out of bed 20 minutes earlier, as we talked a little bit about, maybe walking a pet, walking a neighbor's pet, volunteering, and finding some pets to walk can be a good one. Maybe finding a neighborhood partner to walk with is a good option. And then, trying to be a little bit more familiar with your area. I know that a lot of people told me that with the pandemic and not being able to travel as far as they like, they found new parks that they didn't even know existed in their community. So those are all kind of good things to think about when we're trying to move more. Another barrier is how do we stay motivated? So if you're a physician or a healthcare provider, you can often partner with a psychologist. Change is really hard, and the more frequent follow-up your patients have, the more likely they're going to be able to stay engaged and continue to be physically active. So, not only following up with you, but following up with a psychologist can definitely help them. Partnering up for physical activity at work or in the community, that provides accountability to you, saying, well, you know what, if I have to meet my friend to go out on walk at lunch, I'm going to be more likely to do that than if it's just me, saying, oh, I'm going to get through 3 more emails during lunch instead of getting up and walking. Also, don't forget about what we call non-scale victories. So, maybe the number on the scale isn't moving as much as you want, but are your clothes fitting looser? Do you not feel as short of breath as you're walking around the store or carrying groceries to your car or up to your home? Do you feel like you have more energy? Are you sleeping better? So those are all things that are associated kind of with increase in physical activity that you need to remember. So as I mentioned, this was just a little kind of survey I sent out to some of the doctors I work with to figure out, well, what are your favorite physical activity apps? What kind of helps you keep motivated? So the Apple Health app was a good one. The 7-minute workout, which I already mentioned. The Couch to 5K is kind of fun if you want to start working on walking or jogging more. They have a very good progression, which is going to start really slowly and increase it to get you up to that 3.1 miles. Hopefully there'll be some races this spring. So, maybe that could be a good goal for someone. There's charity miles where all the miles you log make a donation to charity. This Fit League I hadn't really heard of, but it's kind of like a fantasy football league type thing, but it's like with your fitness and you can compete with your friends. So that's something's kind of cool. You can do that across the country. And then Apple Fitness Plus just came out with a new platform where for about $10 a month, and I think there's a decreased fee if you go through and do the year, but they have tons of workouts that are now available online. You can do them from your phone and just jogging, running, biking on a stationary bike, rowing. They have HIIT workouts, so high intensity interval training where you don't really necessarily need a lot of equipment. You just need maybe a mat. They do have weight training. So I don't really make any money from any of these, so don't think that I'm making money, but these are all just things that I've talked to people about as we're trying to find ways to help engage them in increasing their physical activity. The good news is that there was a study that showed that apps do promote physical activity among adults, and when they kind of reviewed them, they found that the most common kind of behavior change techniques that they use were self-monitoring, performance feedback, and goal setting. So there definitely are, some benefits to using those apps as you're trying to increase your physical activity. So as I mentioned, the American College really came up with this exercise as medicine program. If you're interested specifically in more from a healthcare provider's standpoint, they have a lot of great provider links, information on billing and things, and that's kind of what their website looks like. This is just a little bit of something that came out when I opened my new clinic. And so if there's a pill that would lower your risk of heart problems, high blood pressure, certain types of cancer, improve sleep, boost your immune system, and keep your mind sharp as you age, who would not want to try it? Okay, so unfortunately there's no pill, but hopefully after listening to this lecture, you understand how increasing your physical activity can help improve your health in all those ways, and maybe, help find some ways to overcome barriers if there were things that were limiting your ability to be physically active previously. I'm happy to take questions now. I'm also happy to take referrals if there's patients or if there's people who would want to see me and talk more about this. That's just the number for our sports medicine center. So I think I see a few questions. Quilters used to put their iron right by the sewing machine. Now their suggestion is to put it right across the room. So, oh wait, sorry, I went down too far. That was not the first one. Yes. So I think that that's a great point. If you have to get up and get something, then that's going to be a good opportunity for you to not be sitting, to get up, walk across the room. Sometimes you can do that purposely, say, okay, well, I'm going to stick my phone on the other side of the room because I know that I'm going to want to get up and check my phone in, 30 minutes. So put that on the other side of the room. And then that's a great way to kind of get you up and moving. And then it looks like someone also said that Fit On is a good app. So I'll have to check that out because I always like new options to talk to patients about. So I don't know if anyone has, I'm also happy to take kind of like questions not over Zoom. I left it, or not over the chat. I left a few minutes if there's anyone that has any questions that they wanted to ask. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions, but I'm guessing everyone is going to have found some way to be more physically active after this talk today, right? Hopefully, yes.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really informative. We've had a couple slides come in to me, and then someone just posted, will you be able to make the slide deck available?
Yeah, sure, like as a PDF or something like that, I could send, I can probably send that to you if you want to send that out.
If you can send that to me, I can make it a PDF, and when I send out the link to the recording, I can share the slide deck.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Yeah, I know. And a lot of those, and just again, a lot of those things, if you Google, like if you were like, oh, I really liked that sheet about moving more, I want to see what that exercise prescription says. If you Google American College of Sports Medicine, exercises medicine, it's all on that provider page. So you can definitely find those things. If you want the exercise prescription, type that in, say exercise prescription, exercises medicine, and then that stuff will kind of come up too.
Someone asked availability to have a conversation. Would the suggestion be to email you to see what availability is like, or?
Yeah, if you have, again, and I know that this is a very wide kind of audience that I was speaking to today, so I kind of tried to keep it little broader, but I have definitely, if you have a specific question, if it's more medical related or more personal related, my email is down there. I'm happy for you to shoot me an email, and we can help in whatever way we can. Oh, and then someone was asking about the joint pain. So yeah, so if you want information specifically about joint pain, again, the American College of Sports Medicine does have kind of recommendations for, I think if you just type in American College of Sports Medicine, exercising with arthritis or exercising with joint pain, you should be able to find that information. And they'll have some very specific guidelines and recommendations for those who want to be more physically active, but maybe their osteoarthritis is limiting them.
All right, well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you again for presenting to alumni and constituents of UMKC. This recording will be available. We will be posting it, and I will share it out to everyone who registered, but it will be accessible on the wellness page. And thank you all again, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.